The morning she lost, everything smelled like wood smoke and coal biscuits. June sat on the frozen porch steps with her good arm wrapped around her stomach, trying to keep the ache from spreading. Her left arm hung limp at her side, wrapped in a crooked bandage that was already soaked through with dried blood and spit. Her mother-in-law had wrapped it herself, tight and angry, after shoving her out the kitchen door with nothing but a canvas bag and a cracked pair of shoes. The woman's words still rang in her ears. "We took you, and out of pity. Now look at you, a burden." The town was still asleep behind her. Just gray sky above, frostbit dirt below, and a lone horse tethered near the livery that seemed to watch her like it knew something wasn't right. Her fingers itched to wipe the grit off her face, but she didn't dare move. The last time she'd made a sound, her brother-in-law had backhanded her hard enough to make stars dance across her vision. That was last night, or the night before. It blurred together now. Hunger made it worse. She'd come west with a husband who said she was pretty when she smiled, and that he'd build her a home so fine she'd forget the broken parts of her childhood. But that was before the drinking, before his long silences turned into long absences, and before he rode out one evening and never came back. Gone 2 months now. His mother said he was dead. His brother said he wasn't worth coming back for. Either way, they didn't want her. She wasn't from here. No family. No friends. No coin. And now, no use to anyone. Not with a broken arm and a body too thin for missing meals. The streets of Harmon Ridge were cruel to the nameless. Folks didn't stop to ask what happened. They just looked away like she was something rotten by the roadside. She didn't cry. That had dried up weeks ago. The pain in her arm was steady now, pulsing like a second heartbeat. She shifted slightly and tried not to wince. The sound of boots crunching gravel made her sit up straighter, suddenly alert. A man was walking down the main road, slow, calm, with a wide hat pulled low and his hands tucked into the front of his coat. Not law, not preacher, just a man. But something about the way he moved, unbothered, quiet, made her heart hitch. He glanced at her, then looked away just as quick. No pity in his eyes, no disgust, just a man passing through like the rest. She lowered her head again, ashamed of the hope that had flared up. He wasn't for her. Nobody was. The sun barely cut through the clouds by noon, and June still hadn't moved from a step. A few coins had been tossed her way, mostly out of guilt, never kindness. She didn't reach for them, didn't know if she could. Her body was stiff, her fingers half frozen. She might have fallen asleep sitting up. She might have passed out. When she blinked next, there was a soft thud near her feet. A small bundle of cloth. Biscuits. Still warm. She looked up sharply, scanning the street. The man with the wide hat was already halfway to the stables, not looking back. Her throat tightened. She wanted to shout something, thank him maybe, but her voice had gone hoarse days ago from lack of water. She leaned forward, trembling, and picked up the cloth with her good hand. Inside were 2 biscuits and a boiled egg. She broke off a small piece, chewing slow, swallowing harder. It was the first real food she'd had in days. She didn't know why that man had helped. She didn't even know his name. That night, she didn't go back to her in-laws' place. She knew what waited there. More pain, more yelling, and a long silence that felt like drowning. Instead, she curled up near the back of the livery, under a slanted overhang where the rain couldn't reach. She clutched the empty biscuit cloth to her chest like it might keep her warm. Her broken arm throbbed with every breath, and she prayed, soft, panicked words whispered to the dark, that she wouldn't wake up the next morning. But she did, and he was there again. Same wide hat, same quiet walk. This time he paused near a shelter, didn't speak, just set down a flask and walked away. She waited until he was gone before grabbing it. Water, clean and cold. She drank like she was drowning in reverse. She began to watch for him after that. He came at odd hours, never said a word. Sometimes food, sometimes a blanket. Once, a strip of linen and a bottle of some stinging clear liquid that she recognized from her childhood as something her father used when her brother cut his hand on the woodpile. She cleaned her arm as best she could, tears rolling down her cheeks, biting the cloth so she wouldn't scream. Days passed. She didn't know how many. The weather stayed cold. The sky stayed gray. And the man kept coming. He never asked her name, never offered his. Just looked at her with steady eyes that didn't flinch or turn away. Once, she found a note tucked under the flask. 5 words. You still have worth. Heal. Her chest burned reading it. Like her ribs couldn't hold the feeling in. Nobody had said she was worth anything in a long, long time. Not since before the wedding. Before she left her sisters behind back east. Before she convinced herself she could start over out here. She didn't know what he wanted. Why he kept helping. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he saw something in her that even she had forgotten. Or maybe, just maybe, he knew what it was like to be left behind with nothing but pain. The town kept moving. Wagons rolled. Women gossiped. Men drank and brawled. But June stayed silent in the cracks, watching, healing. Slowly, one morning, she gathered the courage to step out farther into the road. Her body still ached, her arm still useless. But she needed to walk, needed to feel something under her feet that wasn't packed mud and hopelessness. She was halfway across the street when her mother-in-law saw her. The woman's face twisted in disgust. You got some nerve showing yourself, she hissed. You think that charity from strangers makes you one of us? Go on, crawl back where you belong. June didn't answer. She didn't have the strength to fight. Not yet. She turned to walk away. That's when the man stepped between them. Just appeared like he'd been watching all along. He didn't say anything, didn't raise his voice, just looked the old woman dead in the eye. And for the first time, June saw fear flicker in her mother-in-law's face. The man spoke one sentence. She's not yours to shame anymore. Then he turned and walked away again, not waiting for thanks. June stood frozen, her legs shaking, her mind racing. She didn't know who he was, but she knew one thing. He had claimed her in that moment, not with chains or promises, but with quiet strength. And she didn't feel invisible anymore. Somewhere deep inside her, a spark returned. Not enough to burn, but just enough to start healing. The man's name was Elias. She heard it from the stable hand one morning, a thin boy with a mop of blonde curls and a nervous twitch in his right eye. That's Elias's horse you're sitting by, he said, glancing at the animal like it might turn on him. He don't talk much, but he sees everything. June looked up at the horse, a tall black gelding with a long scar under one eye. It stared right back at her, calm but unreadable, just like the man who rode him. She didn't say anything. She never corrected anyone when they spoke about her like she wasn't there. Over the next few days, she noticed others who lingered around Elias. There was the doctor's daughter, Rebecca Lyle, too pretty for her own good, always polished like she'd never spent a day in dirt. She'd bring little baskets of food to the livery, pretending she was just being kind, but her eyes always drifted to Elias. And when they did, they stayed too long. June saw it, even when no one else said it out loud. Then there was Sheriff Calder, a man with skin like sunburned leather and eyes that didn't blink enough. He talked slow but looked fast, and he didn't like Elias. That much was clear. June noticed the tension the first time they passed each other near the post office. The sheriff nodded with that kind of smile that didn't mean kindness, and Elias didn't even look at him. Just kept walking quiet as ever. Calder muttered something under his breath, but June didn't catch it. Word around town was that Elias had once ridden with the Rangers, back before something went wrong down near the border. No one knew details. Some said he killed a man and left without a badge. Some said it was worse, but no one could prove anything. All they knew was he came north, bought a small plot of land outside Harmon Ridge, and kept to himself. Until now, he still didn't speak much to June. Sometimes he'd nod if he saw her by the stables, or set down a bundle of food beside her without a word. But every time he showed up, it was like something in the air shifted, like the wind paused to listen. One morning, she found a long gray scarf folded neatly beside her bedroll. Soft wool. No note. No reason. But she wore it anyway. The first time she truly spoke to him was after a rainstorm. She had taken shelter behind the church, huddled against the stone wall, her whole body shivering so bad her teeth knocked. Elias found her there, silent as always, and offered a coat without looking at her face. June, through chattering teeth, whispered, "Why are you helping me?" It came out rough, like it hadn't been used in weeks. He paused for a long time, then said, "Because someone should have." That was all. And he walked away. After that, things began to shift. Rebecca Lyle started watching June with narrowed eyes. Once she walked past and said sweetly, "Some of us work for the things we get." Her voice sounded like sugar on broken glass. June didn't reply. Didn't have to. The truth always found its own way out. Meanwhile, Elias began spending longer hours at the saloon, but not drinking. He'd sit at the back, quiet, listening. Men passed him like shadows, nodding once before moving on. Rumors began to stir that he was looking into something: names, land deeds, old grudges. That he wasn't just a drifter, but a man with a purpose. June began to walk again, even with her arm still healing crooked under the sling. She'd sweep the livery, feed the hens behind the bakery in exchange for bread crusts. People looked at her a little less like she was trash and a little more like she might survive. But her mother-in-law, Esther, didn't let go so easy. One morning, June found her standing near the general store, whispering to two women from the church. Their eyes darted to June, then quickly away. Later, she heard the words, "Doesn't belong here. Shameless. Living off that man." June's chest felt like it had cracked in two. It didn't matter how many nights she went cold or how many chores she took. Some people only saw what they wanted to. One of the only people who seemed to understand was old Benjamin Webb, the gravekeeper. He had a limp from the war and talked like every word cost a penny. But when he saw June struggling with a water bucket near the pump, he stepped beside her and said, "Town remembers pain longer than it remembers truth. Don't let that stop you." It was the kindest thing anyone besides Elias had said in weeks. Benjamin started letting her sit with him while he worked near the churchyard. He taught her how to clear bramble with one hand and how to tie knots that didn't slip. Said she reminded him of someone he'd lost once. Didn't say who. But not everyone was so kind. Rebecca's father, Doc Lyle, came by the livery one afternoon and told Elias flat out, "She's not your problem. You're inviting trouble." Elias didn't flinch, just stared at him and said, "Then let it come." That was when June realized people were choosing sides, and she was at the center of something she hadn't asked for. She overheard Sheriff Calder telling the butcher one night that he'd heard from a deputy down south that Elias might have left a mess behind, something to do with stolen land or a dead rancher. June didn't know what to believe. She didn't ask. She didn't want to lose the one person who'd seen her as more than a burden. Still, doubt started to creep in. Who was Elias, really? Why had he chosen her? One night, she followed him just once when he left town on horseback, riding toward the hills past dusk. She stayed low, careful, her heart pounding. He stopped near a small shack on the edge of a burned-out field and met with a stranger. Tall, angry, pacing. She couldn't hear the words, but the tension was sharp. When a man raised his hand, Elias didn't flinch, just stepped forward fast, grabbed him by the collar, and slammed him against the wall. Then he let go, said something low, and turned back toward town. That night, Elias didn't speak to her, but he handed her a small pouch, coins, enough to leave town if she wanted. She stared at it in her lap for a long time. She didn't leave. The next morning, Benjamin told her something that sat in her gut like a stone. Folks like Elias, they don't help for nothing. They help because once no one helped them. June thought about that, about what might live in the quiet between his words. Maybe Elias wasn't saving her at all. Maybe saving her was the only way he knew how to save himself. The days kept turning. Rebecca's jealousy grew sharper, meaner. She began spreading stories that June was sleeping in Elias's bed, that she'd planned it all, broken arm and everything, to trap him. But when confronted, Elias just looked at the gossips like they were dust in his boot tread. He didn't know them a damn thing. Still, whispers stung. And June, though growing stronger, felt the old ache return of being hated for just existing. But not everyone hated her. A boy named Simon, maybe 9 or 10, started bringing her scraps from his lunch. Said his mama didn't need to know. He reminded June of her younger brother, who died of fever when they were children. She made him little trinkets from twine and bone buttons. For the first time in months, she smiled. But peace was never built to last. One morning, a man rode into town. Tall, lean, hat pulled low. He went by Monroe, but the way Elias froze when he saw him said there was more to the story. The man looked at June too long, smiled too wide. That night, someone tried to break into the livery. June woke to the sound of boots and breathing too close. She ran, barefoot, to the church where Benjamin kept a lantern lit. Elias found her there an hour later, eyes wild. He didn't ask what happened. He just sat beside her until the sun came up. From that day on, Elias never let her walk the streets alone. She didn't ask about Monroe. Didn't need to. She saw it in Elias's jaw every time the man passed him. There was blood between them, old and unfinished. Something was coming. Something deep and violent, just under the surface. June felt in her bones. And somehow, she knew, whatever secrets Elias carried, whatever storms were building, she was part of it now, whether she wanted to be or not. It began with a lie. The morning was calm, deceptively so, the way silence hums right before a gunshot. June had been helping Benjamin lay new gravel along the narrow path through the churchyard when a voice called out from the street. Sharp, official. June Tally, you're needed at the sheriff's office. She froze. The rake slipped from her fingers. Her heart thundered, the name Tally cutting like a blade. No one had used her maiden name since she married Caleb. Her hand went to the sling out of instinct, though the arm beneath had started to heal. Benjamin stepped between her and the voice before she could react. What's this about? Sheriff Calder answered from behind his badge like he had nothing but time. Matter of stolen property. Witness says she's involved. June had never stolen a thing in her life. Not once. But she saw it then, plain as day, that this wasn't about law. It was about control, about someone pulling strings behind the curtain. At the office, she was shown a sack of flour, a jar of sugar, and a handful of silver trinkets, stuff that had been reported missing from the Lyle household 2 nights prior. The implication was clear. She stared at the items. They weren't hers. She'd never seen them before. Then came the twist. A young girl from the church, Marilal's niece, barely 11, had claimed she'd seen June near the house that night. Said June had something wrapped under her shawl. It was a lie. June didn't speak for nearly a full minute. Her throat was dry. Her face burned. Calder leaned back in his chair, watching her like a cat does a bird. You're not under arrest. Just don't go too far from town. She left with her dignity scraped raw and her heart splintered into pieces. That night, Elias didn't come. The next day, people stopped looking her in the eye. Simon's mother pulled him away from her at the pump. The baker didn't save her a crust. And Benjamin, even he had gone quiet. Not out of belief, but fear. She knew it. By the third day, she had stopped leaving the edge of town. She sat by the old fence post near the livery, the one place that still felt like hers, and stared out toward the horizon. That's when Elias returned. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew. He sat beside her, not close, but near enough that the air between them felt safer. And then, in a voice quieter than dusk, he said, "They want to break you." She turned her head. Why? He shrugged slightly. Because you remind them they're not good. It didn't make full sense to her, but stayed with her. You remind them they're not good. Maybe that was what made folks cruel, being forced to see their own rotting parts reflected in someone who refused to stay down. Later that week, Benjamin knocked on her door. He had the girl, Mara's niece, with him. The child was shaking, her eyes red. Benjamin said he'd found her crying behind the schoolhouse. She'd confessed it wasn't true, that she hadn't seen anything, that her aunt had told her to lie. June felt her stomach twist into something sour and breathless. She didn't hug the girl, didn't curse her. She just nodded quietly. She understood too well the price of survival. Elias took that information straight to Calder. But the sheriff laughed. A child changing her story? That won't hold. People already decided. Elias's jaw flexed, but he said nothing, just turned and walked out. 2 nights later, someone threw a rock through June's window. It landed beside her cot, spraying dust and glass. She didn't scream. She just picked it up and stared at it. There were words scratched into the stone. Whores get. She didn't sleep after that, just sat upright, wrapped in the scarf Elias had given her, staring at the door. The next day, Rebecca Lyle strutted past her and said sweetly, "Maybe it's time you left." Harmon Ridge has never taken a charity. It was Elias who answered, appearing from nowhere, stepping between them like he had before. Careful how you talk to people who've survived worse than you ever could. Rebecca flushed, but said nothing. She turned on her heel, heels clicking sharp against the wooden walk. That night, June finally asked Elias, "Why are they so afraid of me?" His answer was slow, thoughtful. "Because you've already been burned, and you didn't vanish. You're still here." June didn't feel brave. She felt like a shadow held together with bruises and thread. But Elias said something else before leaving that stuck with her even deeper. Truth isn't loud, but it's patient. She didn't know what he meant then. Not fully, but she learned soon. Days passed. June healed, slowly. The bone in her arm set crooked but strong. She could use her fingers again, could pull water, could walk long enough to see the outer edge of Elias's land. He started bringing her there more, quietly, without speaking. Just a gesture, a tilt of the head, a small nod, and she'd follow. The land was wide, filled with silence that wasn't lonely. He had a cabin near the back, shaded by cottonwoods, with a fence still half finished and a barn that leaned slightly like it had grown tired waiting. But the place felt like peace. He let her help paint the shutters, let her plant sage in a patch of tilled dirt. It wasn't spoken, but it was clear. He was giving her space, a place no one else knew. Then came the twist that neither of them saw coming. One evening, Elias didn't return from town. June waited until dark, then until midnight, then until dawn. Nothing. It was Benjamin who came, breathless, coat soaked through. "They've taken him. Locked him up." "What? Why?" "Land fraud. Sheriff says Elias has been buying property under false names. Says he stole from a widow out near Mill Creek." It didn't make sense. June went straight to the jail, her broken arm forgotten. Sheriff Calder leaned against the wall, chewing tobacco like he was waiting for a reason to spit. "He's a liar," June said. "You know it. This is about you not liking what he stands for." Calder chuckled. "What he stands for? You mean silence and secrets." But June saw it. Beneath the sheriff's grin, fear. Elias knew something Calder didn't want getting out. That night, June broke into Elias's cabin. Not to steal. She wanted to understand. She tore through the back room, searching. What she found wasn't what she expected. A box. Letters. Dozens of them. All addressed to the same name, Catherine Talley. Her mother. June fell to her knees. The letters were from her father, dated from before he died, back when she was barely 5. There was no explanation for how Elias had them. But one letter stood out. It wasn't from her father. It was from Elias. Short, to the point. "I found her. She's here. Her husband's gone. She's not safe. Let me try." It was dated nearly a year ago. She felt dizzy. Her hand shook as she picked it up again. He'd known. He'd known who she was. All this time. She didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Not after that. When Elias was released 3 days later, charges dropped mysteriously, no explanation given. She was waiting by the trail to his land. He looked tired, faded. His coat was dirt-stained, his jaw bruised. But when he saw her, he stopped cold. She held the letter out. "You knew who I was." He didn't lie, didn't pretend, just nodded. "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have let me help?" That broke something open inside her. "I'm not a child," she said. You don't get to protect me without letting me know. He looked down, voice rough. Your father, he saved me once. Long time ago. I owed him. June stepped back. So this was a debt? No, not anymore. She stared at him. Then what is it? He didn't answer, but his eyes were soft, wounded, like something he'd tried hard to bury was beginning to surface. That was the midpoint, the shift. June didn't walk away, but she didn't follow him home either. For days, she stayed silent, working near the graveyard again, letting the space between them breathe. Meanwhile, the town stirred. Rebecca Lyle left quietly one morning, bags packed, face pale. Her father resigned from the church board, and sheriff called her. Rumor had it he'd been seen arguing with a man from the state capitol. Something about land deeds, bribes, and old crimes resurfacing. June knew Elias had pushed. Quietly, relentlessly. He hadn't fought with fists. He'd used truth. She sat on his porch one morning, arms crossed. He came out holding 2 mugs of tea. You're not very good at asking for help, she said. He smiled faintly. Neither are you. And for the first time, she laughed. Not loudly, but enough. The betrayal still stung. But it wasn't sharp anymore. Because what Elias had done, though misguided, had come from care. From a promise he never got to keep when she was a girl. Now, June stood taller. Not just because she was healing, but because for the first time in her life, she was choosing to stay. The morning frost had started to thin when the first real consequence landed hard on Elias's front step. It came in the form of a letter, hand-delivered by a stranger from out of town, sealed in thick wax and stamped with a name neither Elias nor June had spoken in weeks. Caleb Talley. Her husband. He was alive. June stood beside Elias, the letter trembling in her hand. Elias said nothing, but the tension in his jaw was a storm. The air around them turned to ice. She read the letter slowly, twice. It was written in Caleb's shaky scrawl. He'd heard she was still in Harmon Ridge. Claimed he'd been jumped by bandits and left for dead near Santa Rosa. Claimed he'd spent months recovering, trying to get back to her. Now he was coming home. Her stomach twisted, not with joy or relief, but dread. She hadn't missed him, hadn't mourned him. She had mourned what she thought he might be, what he promised before the drinking, before the bruises. But the man who wrote that letter wasn't the one she once loved. He was the one who left her in the hands of people who hurt her. Elias looked at her after she finished reading. You don't owe him anything. She nodded, but that didn't change the knot in her chest. Word spread fast. Caleb was returning, and suddenly, the town that had scorned her began to look at her differently. Some folks whispered behind her back that she had betrayed her husband with another man. Others claimed she had used Elias to survive, only to fall back into her rightful place as a wife. The judgment returned, heavier than ever. Her body healed, but her spirit staggered under the weight of being claimed again. This time, by someone who had abandoned her. Elias grew distant. Not cold, not angry, just quiet. He gave her space, and in that silence, everything between them grew tight with tension. They spoke less, worked side by side like ghosts who used to know each other. She still drank his tea. He still left her small notes near the windowsill. But something raw had opened up between them. The unspoken fear that what they had built was about to collapse under the name Talley. One evening, she found Elias splitting wood with a fury she hadn't seen before. She waited until the axe stopped before speaking. You think I'm going to go back to him? He didn't look at her, just said, I think men like him know how to twist their way back into the center of a story. That hit harder than she expected, because deep down, she knew it was true. Caleb was the kind of man who fed on guilt, who could make a woman feel like running was betrayal and staying was love. And some nights, she still felt that little girl who believed marriage was safety, even if it broke her in the process. Then Caleb returned. He rode in at sunset, clean-shaven, wrapped in a dark coat, limping slightly to sell the story of survival. His eyes found her instantly, and a smile broke across his face that didn't touch his eyes. June, he said, stepping down from the wagon like no time had passed at all. God, I missed you." She didn't move. Elias appeared beside her, silent as a shadow. He didn't speak, didn't threaten, just stood there like a stone wall between her and the past. Caleb's eyes flicked to him. "This your new man?" June's voice was steady. "He's not yours to question." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he smiled again, easy. "I just want to talk." In private. Elias stepped aside without a word, trusting her to decide. And she did. She followed Caleb to the church steps, sat with him in the growing dark. He told his story: bandits, fever, a traveling doctor who nursed him back to life. But she watched his hands, the way they twitched when he lied, the way they curled into fists when she didn't react. "Why didn't you come back sooner?" she asked. He hesitated. "I didn't know if I'd be welcome." "You were never gone in your own mind, were you?" she whispered. "You thought I'd wait." "I hoped you would," he said. Something called her, didn't want getting out. That night, June broke into Elias's cabin. Not to steal, she wanted to understand. She tore through the back room, searching. What she found wasn't what she expected. A box. Letters. Dozens of them. All addressed to the same name, Catherine Talley. Her mother. June fell to her knees. The letters were from her father, dated from before he died, back when she was barely 5. There was no explanation for how Elias had them. But one letter stood out. It wasn't from her father. It was from Elias. Short. To the point. "I found her. She's here. Her husband's gone. She's not safe. Let me try." It was dated nearly a year ago. She felt dizzy. Her hand shook as she picked it up again. He'd known. He'd known who she was. All this time. She didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Not after that. When Elias was released 3 days later, charges dropped mysteriously. No explanation given. She was waiting by the trail to his land. He looked tired, faded. His coat was dirt-stained, his jaw bruised. But when he saw her, he stopped cold. She held the letter out. "You knew who I was." He didn't lie, didn't pretend, just nodded. "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have let me help?" That broke something open inside her. "I'm not a child," she said. "You don't get to protect me without letting me know." He looked down, voice rough. "Your father, he saved me once. Long time ago. I owed him." June stepped back. "So this was a debt?" "No, not anymore." She stared at him. "Then what is it?" He didn't answer, but his eyes were soft, wounded, like something he'd tried hard to bury was beginning to surface. That was the midpoint, the shift. June didn't walk away, but she didn't follow him home either. For days, she stayed silent, working near the graveyard again, letting the space between them breathe. Meanwhile, the town stirred. Rebecca Lyle left quietly one morning, bags packed, face pale. Her father resigned from the church board, and Sheriff called her. Rumor had it he'd been seen arguing with a man from the state capitol. Something about land deeds, bribes, and old crimes resurfacing. June knew Elias had pushed. Quietly, relentlessly. He hadn't fought with fists. He'd used truth. She sat on his porch one morning, arms crossed. He came out holding 2 mugs of tea. "You're not very good at asking for help," she said. He smiled faintly. "Neither are you." And for the first time, she laughed. Not loudly, but enough. The betrayal still stung. But it wasn't sharp anymore. Because what Elias had done, though misguided, had come from care. From a promise he never got to keep when she was a girl. Now, June stood taller. Not just because she was healing, but because for the first time in her life, she was choosing to stay. The morning frost had started to thin when the first real consequence landed hard on Elias's front step. It came in the form of a letter, hand-delivered by a stranger from out of town, sealed in thick wax, and stamped with a name neither Elias nor June had spoken in weeks, Caleb Talley. Her husband. He was alive. June stood beside Elias, the letter trembling in her hand. Elias said nothing, but the tension in his jaw was a storm. The air around them turned to ice. She read the letter slowly, twice. It was written in Caleb's shaky scrawl. He'd heard she was still in Harmon Ridge. Claimed he'd been jumped by bandits and left for dead near Santa Rosa. Claimed he'd spent months recovering, trying to get back to her. Now he was coming home. Her stomach twisted, not with joy or relief, but dread. She hadn't missed him, hadn't mourned him. She had mourned what she thought he might be, what he promised before the drinking, before the bruises. But the man who wrote that letter wasn't the one she once loved. He was the one who left her in the hands of people who hurt her. Elias looked at her after she finished reading. You don't owe him anything. She nodded, but that didn't change the knot in her chest. Word spread fast. Caleb was returning. And suddenly, the town that had scorned her began to look at her differently. Some folks whispered behind her back that she had betrayed her husband with another man. Others claimed she had used Elias to survive, only to fall back into her rightful place as a wife. The judgment returned, heavier than ever. Her body healed, but her spirit staggered under the weight of being claimed again. This time, by someone who had abandoned her. Elias grew distant. Not cold, not angry, just quiet. He gave her space, and in that silence, everything between them grew tight with tension. They spoke less, worked side by side like ghosts who used to know each other. She still drank his tea. He still left her small notes near the windowsill. But something raw had opened up between them. The unspoken fear that what they had built was about to collapse under the name Tally. One evening, she found Elias splitting wood with a fury she hadn't seen before. She waited until the axe stopped before speaking. You think I'm going to go back to him? He didn't look at her, just said, I think men like him know how to twist their way back into the center of a story. That hit harder than she expected, because deep down, she knew it was true. Caleb was the kind of man who fed on guilt, who could make a woman feel like running was betrayal and staying was love. And some nights, she still felt that little girl who believed marriage was safety, even if it broke her in the process. Then Caleb returned. He rode in at sunset, clean-shaven, wrapped in a dark coat, limping slightly to sell the story of survival. His eyes found her instantly, and a smile broke across his face that didn't touch his eyes. June, he said, stepping down from the wagon like no time had passed at all. God, I missed you. She didn't move. Elias appeared beside her, silent as a shadow. He didn't speak, didn't threaten, just stood there like a stone wall between her and the past. Caleb's eyes flicked to him. This your new man? June's voice was steady. He's not yours to question. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he smiled again, easy. I just want to talk. In private. Elias stepped aside without a word, trusting her to decide. And she did. She followed Caleb to the church steps, sat with him in the growing dark. He told his story, bandits, fever, a traveling doctor who nursed him back to life. But she watched his hands, the way they twitched when he lied, the way they curled into fists when she didn't react. Why didn't you come back sooner? She asked. He hesitated. I didn't know if I'd be welcome. You were never gone in your own mind. Were you? She whispered. You thought I'd wait. I hope you would, he said. I loved you, June. She looked at him, then really looked. You didn't love me. You possessed me. And then you left me to starve. His face darkened. So that's what this is about? You think I abandoned you? You did, she said. When she walked away, she didn't turn to see if he followed. But consequences don't fade just because you speak the truth. The town was split now. Some saw her strength. Others saw her as defiant, too bold for a woman with nothing. And Caleb, despite his lies, began to gather quiet support from those who felt Elias was a danger to the town's image. After all, Elias had a past, and people like Calder never let that kind of thing go. Sheriff Calder, who had been quiet since the failed land charges, saw his opportunity return. He cornered Elias outside the general store. You brought all this trouble with you. Should have kept walking when you got here. Elias didn't answer, just walked away. But Calder wasn't done. Days later, June's small patch of land near the church was raided, tools missing, herbs pulled out by the root. Her new cot burned, a message carved into the tree beside it. You're still his wife. The fear came back like a tide. Elias offered her shelter again, but she refused. I can't keep depending on you, she said. You're not, he replied. You're standing. But standing alone don't mean you can't lean when it's cold. It was the first moment of warmth between them since Caleb's return. And yet, the cracks remained. June tried to rebuild her patch, but Calder sent 2 deputies to question her about her relationship with Elias, implying illegal cohabitation, implying she'd forged her land claim. It was all scare tactics, but it worked. She lost sleep, lost trust. Rebecca Lyle, gone but not forgotten, had written a letter to the town council before leaving, accusing Elias of coercion, saying June had been manipulated during her weakest days. It was poison soaked in manners, and it had taken root. One night, Elias found her crying behind the barn. Not loud, not broken, just quiet tears she hadn't meant to let fall. He knelt beside her, wiped her cheek. "I can leave," he said, "if that would protect you." She shook her head. "That's what they want. For me to be alone again, to be weak." He touched her wrist gently. "You're not weak. Not anymore. But being strong don't mean you can't be loved." Those words struck something deep, because that was her greatest fear. Being strong meant being hard. Being loved meant being soft. Could both live in the same heart? The answer came days later when Caleb tried to confront her at the well. Said he wanted her back. Said he forgave her. That they could go somewhere new, start again. "I'm not yours anymore," she said simply. Caleb lost control, grabbed her arm, tried to pull her toward the wagon. And Elias came. It wasn't a fair fight. Caleb never stood a chance. But even as he was knocked into the dirt, bruised and coughing blood, he spat out one final truth. "She's still my wife. And unless she files, she's mine in the eyes of the law." That night, June stared at the flame in the lantern beside her bed and thought of how many women were still owned by names they no longer believed in. It was not just a signature. It was a death, a burial of the girl who once hoped. She walked to the sheriff's office the next morning and asked for papers. Sheriff Calder grinned. "You sure you want to go through with it? That man's your last name." June didn't smile. "That name almost killed me." She signed. The final act of severance came when Caleb was caught sneaking into Elias's cabin that night, looking for something, money, letters, perhaps the box June had found. Elias didn't beat him. He simply handed him over Calder. "Charge him or let him go," Elias said. "But keep him off my land." Calder looked like he'd swallowed a rock. "You don't give orders." "No," Elias said, "but you're running out of people who listen to yours." And so the town shifted again. Caleb left 2 days later, spat in the dirt as he went, didn't look back. Some people still didn't like June, still whispered when she walked past. But others, like Simon's mother or the baker's wife, started offering small gestures. A nod, a loaf left at her door. She and Elias sat together again on the porch. No labels, no vows, just quiet. But it wasn't silence born of fear anymore. It was rest, the kind earned after battle. The consequences were still echoing, but June no longer feared them. She knew who she was now, and she knew, when storms came again, she wouldn't face them alone. The truth had been simmering for weeks, bubbling low beneath the surface like heat under dry soil. June felt it coming before she even knew what shape it would take. The air around Elias turned heavier. His silence wasn't the kind that comforted anymore. It was the kind that guarded. Each time she looked at him, something in her chest whispered, "He's still keeping something." She didn't press. Not yet. Instead, she worked the land harder, grew stronger. Her arm, though not perfect, was usable now. She'd built up her herb garden again with Benjamin's help. The fence was repaired, the path to Elias's cabin well-worn. But the distance between them, though not wide, was real. It cracked open one evening when a stranger rode into town, dust-covered, tight-jawed, and carrying a folder under his coat. He went straight to the sheriff's office. June saw it from across the street, and something in her stomach coiled. The man wasn't a wanderer. He was here for someone. Later that night, Elias showed up at her door. His hands were dirty, his eyes distant. She let him in, but neither of them sat. They stood in the center of the cabin like two people trying to decide if the storm had already passed or was just beginning. "I need to tell you something," he said. She nodded once. "I know." He took a long breath. "You remember those letters? From your father?" She nodded. "You never explained how you got them." He looked away. "I didn't just find them. I kept them. On purpose." Her blood ran cold. "I was there the night your father died," he continued. "South of San Angelo. We were riding together. Him, me, two others. Rangers. We've been tracking a cattle thief for days. When the shot started, he went down first. The rest of us scattered. I." His voice cracked for the first time. "I ran. I didn't know he was still alive until later. But by then, it was too late. I found him dying. And I didn't stay. I took the letters off his saddlebag. I kept them for years. Didn't even read them until I saw your name on a church registry here, months ago." June stood frozen, her heartbeat slamming inside her ribs. "You let me believe you were a stranger," she whispered. "I didn't want to be the man who ran," he said, his voice shaking. "I wanted to be the one who helped. And I thought, maybe if I could do right by you, it would mean something." "You should have told me," she said. "I know." The betrayal sat heavy in the air between them. "I trusted you," she said. "Not because you saved me, but because you didn't ask for anything back." "I still don't," he said. "You can hate me, June. I won't blame you." She didn't cry. Her tears had long since dried up. But she walked past him, opened the door, and said softly, "I need time." Elias left without another word. For the first time in weeks, she slept alone, not just in body but in soul. The days that followed blurred. The town shifted around her again. Whispers returned. The man who'd ridden into town, he wasn't just a stranger. He was an investigator from the capital, sent to look into land disputes involving Harmon Ridge and the Lyle family. Apparently, Caleb's return had stirred dust in places folks hoped would stay quiet. The Lyles had sold stolen land to more than one settler, including Elias. That's when June learned the final blow. Elias had known about the fraud for months, had kept it hidden to avoid dragging her into a mess with Calder and the council. He'd tried to fix it quietly. He had even paid off some debts in secret to protect Benjamin's property and June's garden plot. All of it done without telling her. It wasn't greed. It was fear. He didn't want to lose the life they were building. He didn't want her to look at him like she was now, like she didn't recognize him. She confronted him near the well. "You keep deciding things for me," she said. "You think silence keeps people safe, but it just makes them small." He nodded, ashamed. "I was afraid if I gave you the truth, you'd leave." "I deserve the truth," she said. He didn't argue. He couldn't. But before either of them could begin to mend the rift, tragedy struck. Benjamin was found unconscious behind the church, beaten bloody, skull fractured. The doctor said it was a miracle he was breathing. Someone had left a note pinned to the old gravekeeper's chest. "Keep protecting whores. You'll end up buried beside them." June's hand shook as she read it. She'd seen this kind of hatred before, but not like this. This was a message to her. Calder dismissed it as drifter violence, said it was a warning gone too far. But June knew. The town was ready to break apart again. And this time, blood had been spilled. She didn't wait for Elias. She went to the church, lit a lantern, and called for a meeting. Only a few came. The baker's wife, Simon's mother, a quiet schoolteacher who once gave her a blanket. They sat in pews, wary, unsure. She stood before them and told her story. The broken arm, the exile, the alleyway behind the livery. She didn't ask for pity. She spoke plainly, calmly. Then she told them about Benjamin, about the cost of staying quiet. "I won't hide anymore," she said. "Not for Caleb, not for Elias, not for the sheriff. If you want to help fix what's broken in this town, speak now. If not, I'll keep standing, even if I have to stand alone." She didn't expect applause, and she didn't get any. But nobody walked out. The next morning, the baker left a full loaf on her step. The schoolteacher started bringing water to Benjamin's bedside. Simon's mother came by and offered to help replant the garden. And Elias came late, hat in hand, a bruise on his jaw. He looked wrecked. "I didn't tell you because I didn't think I was worthy of what we had," he said. but I'm done hiding, done choosing silence." She looked at him long and hard, then nodded once. "I'm not asking you to be perfect," she said, "just honest." And that's when he gave her the final piece of the truth. "Calder and the Lyles, there's paperwork, ledgers, land deeds, stashed at the old mill. It's why Benjamin was hurt. He helped me hide them." June felt her breath catch. "This town won't change unless someone makes it," he said. That night, they went to the mill together. Quiet, careful. Inside, in a box beneath the floorboards, were the records. Pages of false deeds, payments, bribes. The web ran deep. They brought them to the investigator. The man from the Capitol barely blinked. "You understand what this means?" he asked. June nodded. "We burned the rot. It wasn't quick. It wasn't clean. But within days, Calder resigned. The Lyle holdings were seized. Town, council shaken to the roots. Elias was cleared. Benjamin woke, groggy and grinning. In June, she stood before the town one final time. "I used to think survival was enough," she said. "But survival without dignity isn't living. I'm not asking for your blessing, just your decency." Some looked away. Others stood. But this time, the silence wasn't against her. It was listening. Elias stood beside her, not in front, not behind. Equal. They didn't speak of love. They didn't have to, because trust, once shattered, doesn't come back with grand gestures. It grows, inch by inch, under hard light and truth. The days after the storm passed quietly, as if the town itself had taken a long, deep breath. The streets of Harmon Ridge no longer whispered quite so sharply when June walked through. No more muttered names. No more pointed stares. A few still turned away, but most gave her space. And in a place like this, that was more than forgiveness. That was respect. She had survived the fire without losing her voice. Now, she was learning how to live again without flinching. Benjamin slowly returned to his post behind the church. He walked with a cane now and didn't speak much. But when June brought him a tin of tea and set it beside his old stool, he gave her the softest smile. "Told you," he said. "Town remembers pain longer than truth. But not forever." She smiled back. "Still hurts, though." He nodded. "That's how you know it mattered." The land that once held her fear now held her roots. June expanded the herb garden. She bartered salves and tonics with nearby homesteaders. A woman who had once begged for bread now stood with her sleeves rolled up, her hands in the earth, her name spoken without pity. She slept at Elias's cabin most nights now, but not out of need, not out of dependency. She had her own room, her own space, and he never crossed a line she didn't first draw. Their connection wasn't about ownership or fixing. It was a slow, steady choosing. Every day he showed up. Every day she let him. They rarely spoke of the past, but sometimes late at night, with her head resting just beside his shoulder, she'd ask something quiet about her father, about that final ride, about the man Elias had once been. And he always answered honestly. No smoothing over, no heroism, just the truth, bruises and all. "You think he'd be proud of me?" she asked one evening when the sky was soft with early dusk. Elias looked at her, his voice low. "He'd be in awe of you." She nodded but didn't smile. "I'm not sure I'll ever stop feeling like I was broken." He didn't rush to comfort her. He just held her hand. "Maybe you were, but you healed crooked and stronger." Those words stayed with her. So did the girl she used to be. There were moments, quiet ones, when she'd look at her own reflection in the water bucket or feel the ache in her arm and remember the barn, the hunger, the humiliation. But she didn't run from those memories. She honored them. They were what made her spine hold straight when the wind picked up. Simon still came by sometimes, shy but eager. He helped her feed the chickens and fix a gate that stuck. He reminded her that there was a future being shaped right in front of her, not just the past survived. She taught him how to grow rosemary, how to make liniment for scrapes. He called her Miss June now, without fear. The town had changed. Not all at once, not entirely, but in small, meaningful ways. Sheriff Calder had left after the investigation, his hat lower than his pride. A woman from Laredo replaced him. Tough, fair, uninterested in local gossip. The saloon cleaned up its back alley. The church began collecting supplies for women in crisis. And the town council finally passed a rule allowing women to claim small plots without a husband's co-signature. June wasn't credited publicly for any of it, but she didn't need credit. She saw the shift, felt it. One day, as she was setting baskets of herbs outside her gate, a wagon rolled up slow. Caleb sat in the driver's seat. He looked worn, thinner. Not cruel anymore, just tired. Life had knocked the swagger out of him. She didn't flinch. "Didn't think you'd still be here," he said, voice rasped. "I am," she answered. He looked around at the land, at the garden, at the fence she'd built with her own hands. "I don't know what I thought would happen," he said. "Guess I didn't think you'd last." She met his eyes. "I didn't just last. I lived." He nodded, then looked down at his hands. "You were always stronger than I knew." "That was your mistake," she said gently. "Not mine." He didn't argue. He left a few minutes later, didn't ask for anything, didn't offer anything either. Just tipped his hat and drove off. Elias came by that evening, eyes wary, but she shook her head. "He's not my story anymore." Elias said nothing, just slid her hand into his and held it while the sun sank low behind the cottonwoods. Months passed, then a full year. Winter softened into spring. The trees bloomed again. The town finally stopped holding its breath every time she walked by. On the first anniversary of the day Elias found her in the alley, June tied a ribbon to the post where she once sat begging. It wasn't a memorial. It was a reminder that she had lived. Not everyone understood it, but she didn't care. Later that night, Elias brought her something wrapped in cloth. She opened it and found a small carved figure, wood, rough but careful. A woman, standing tall, one arm slightly bent. In her hand, a seed. "It's you," he said simply. She didn't speak, just held it against her chest. There was no wedding, no big promises. They didn't need them. What they had was deeper than vows. It was a quiet, unshakable truth. They had both been broken by the world in different ways. And they had both chosen to keep showing up anyway. One morning, June walked past a mirror inside the feed store. She caught her reflection and stopped. She saw a woman who had starved, hurt, cried, fought. A woman who had been burned and left. A woman who had survived things others wouldn't believe. But more than that, she saw someone who had not become bitter. Someone who had rebuilt with hands that still trembled some mornings. Someone who no longer apologized for taking up space. She smiled. Not big, but real. It wasn't the kind of ending stories were written about. No grand rescue. No perfect justice. Just a woman, whole in her own name. And a man who stood beside her, not to protect her from the world, but to walk through it with her, step by step, rooted, crooked, and unshakably alive.